Good evening and welcome to the new BUGAJSKI Hour. I'm happy to be back in Pristina to examine important global and local developments that affect the lives of all Kosovars. And today I will be discussing some important questions with a major figure, and our guest on the BUGAJSKI hot seat is Visar Ymeri, the president of Vetëvendosja. But first, my political commentary on an important international topic is entitled US Elections Officially Launched. America's presidential elections have been officially launched with a series of state primaries to decide who will be the two candidates in the race for the White House in November. Primaries select delegates for each candidate depending on their share of the popular vote. Whoever gains more than half the total number of delegates on a national scale becomes the party choice for president and is endorsed at the national conventions during the summer. Both the Democrat and Republican fields have narrowed. Only two Democrats are left standing, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders. The battle between Clinton and Sanders revolves around the question of purity versus pragmatism. They are disputing what it means to be a progressive, a euphemism used by liberal Democrats to denote a socialist agenda. Democrats are deeply divided. Sanders charges that anyone, including Clinton, who takes money from Wall Street and has a well-funded political action committee, does not qualify as a progressive, while Clinton claims that Sanders would disqualify the majority of Democrats, including President Barack Obama, from being progressive in any way. The Republican battle is even more fierce. The primary contest is between real estate billionaire Donald Trump and Ted Cruz, an ultra-conservative maverick. Marco Rubio, a Cuban-American senator from Florida, could gain the support of the Republican establishment, but he is attacked for a lack of policy achievements. Jeb Bush, brother and son of two former presidents, has proved the biggest disappointment so far, despite being initially declared the natural Republican nominee. He is criticized by rivals as a Washington insider who is out of touch with ordinary Americans. However, Bush is counting on both Trump and Cruz being seen as unelectable by mainstream America because of their radical positions. Indeed, the question of electability will be key in these elections. On the Democrat side, Sanders is a self-professed democratic socialist and benefits from votes from idealistic young people and anti-establishment protesters. But this is unlikely to carry over to the large battleground states where moderates and centrists disagree with his big government and high taxes prescriptions. Likewise, on the Republican side, mainstream America is unlikely to vote for a xenophobe such as Trump or a religious radical such as Cruz, who are both castigated by senior members of their own party. That said, election season is always full of surprises, and this year, more than in previous ballots, one can expect the unexpected. It is time for the BUGAJSKI hot seat with our special guest today, Visar Ymeri, the head of Vetëvendosja, the main opposition party in Kosovo. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
We have a lot of ground to cover, and I would like to use the opportunity to better understand Vetëvendosja and to allow also American viewers to better understand your party, your movement, both your programs, your goals, strategies, and so on in domestic and foreign policy. So let me begin with a sort of overall question, which I think is quite important for a lot of particularly political analysts, but also policy makers. Where do you fit in the political spectrum, if at all? Are you leftist? Are you rightists? Are you centrists? Are you nationalists, internationalists? How do you define your overarching ideology?
Well, as a political movement, we are easily can be described as a social democratic program on the what we call the governing alternative, the political program of Vetëvendosja. We are proposing a state that has three major pillars. The first pillar is the state of justice, where obviously we lack in Kosovo. The current justice system in Kosovo is totally captured by the government, and as such it is not able to produce equal justice for the citizens of Kosovo. The second pillar, which is very important for Kosovo, is the economic pillar, which we call the developmental state program, where we see the state institutions have a great role into providing an environment whereby local domestic production can flourish, and whereby we can make better the current trade deficit that we have, which is enormous. Kosovo exports only 10% of its imports, and as such, obviously, this economy cannot be viable. In the developmental state, we think that it is very important to mobilize all the resources that we have, whether they be natural resources, financial resources, human resources, for the economic development, and we see state institutions, public institutions having a very important role in this. And the third pillar is the social state, where we see for more social justice and a better redistribution of wealth in Kosovo in order to stop this widening gap between rich and poor that is happening in Kosovo.
So you see yourselves as a centre-left social democratic formation, close to what, Labour Party in UK, Social Democrats in Germany?
It's pretty hard to have a sort of a analogy with any of the political parties, especially in the Western Europe, because Kosovo lives in totally different circumstances. Sure. We, as a society, are in a much lower state of development from the Western societies, and therefore, obviously, our proposals and our program is something different from what you would see in Western Europe in the social democratic realm. But I think that there are similarities as well. There are similarities with let's say, some of President Obama's policies as well, and some of his speeches that he had, where he made a lot of emphasis on the need for equality, on the need to get America back to work, and on public investments that would generate economic cycle. So in this respect, I think that you can find similarities with different political parties.
Maybe also closer to Bernie Sanders in his democratic socialist, so-called progressive
Yes,
agenda.
there are some similarities with that as well. And obviously, I think that the political spectrum in the Western world especially is changing. As we can see, we have, for example, within the Democrats in the United States of America, we have a person like Bernie Sanders who is competing to become a president of the United States of America, which has moved a bit more on the left from where President Obama was. And President Obama was sort of a surprise with his policies. We have the same changes, let's say, in the Labour Party in Great Britain as well, with Corbyn coming to taking the lead of the Labour Party. So there are some changes, and I think this is a reflection of the changes that we see in Western societies, where through neoliberal policies you had this widening gap between rich and poor, and the middle class somehow was fading away. And I think that the middle class was the guarantee of these centered parties, like center-left and center-right. And now with moving away of that middle class and with the new antagonisms in the social sphere, I think that this is reflected in the political sphere as well.
Although some would say both Corbyn and Sanders are too far to the left for them to be electable in the mainstream. Even a lot of the middle class wouldn't necessarily vote for them. But we'll see. I mean, it's early stages in both countries.
The fact that they came to this far is something to be noted.
Sure. Let us turn now specifically to Vete Vendosia. I mean, I want to focus on foreign policy a little bit later, but let us start with domestic politics, both parliamentary and extra-parliamentary. Can you explain to us why is it that Vete Vendosia and your coalition partners have been disrupting some of these parliamentary sessions with tear gas, whistles, other protests? Do you think this undermines the democratic process?
I think that it is first a responsibility and a duty of members of parliament to protect the sovereignty of the country and its territorial integrity. And we took an oath for that. Each member of parliament takes an oath before becoming member of parliament, and in this oath we say we have guaranteed that we are going to protect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the country. Both sovereignty and territorial integrity have been threatened by the agreements that the government of Kosovo has signed with Serbia on one side in Brussels and then with Montenegro on the other side for the demarcation of the border. And as such, we saw these agreements as a total and a direct undermining of our sovereignty and territorial integrity. Yes, in the parliament, one is always shocked to see the use of tear gas. But the current situation in Kosovo, where the government of Kosovo continually disrespected the parliament and continually actually took measures in order to make a parliament as an attachment to the government decisions, there was no other means to prevent these agreements from being implemented.
So you're saying Parliament should have been opened up more to debate on these questions? The agreement with Serbia, the agreement with Montenegro?
Parliament should have been the instance where these decisions are taken, because Parliament is the highest legislative and political body in Kosovo.
But the government could outvote you in Parliament.
But the agreements that have been signed with Serbia in Brussels, they specifically said that they are not going to be presented to the Parliament. So they were supposed to write a decree, and by governmental decree, which would have been checked by the Constitutional Court, the Serb majority municipalities community would have been established. So they neglected the Parliament even formally in this case.
Paradoxically, what you're saying is it's the government that is delegitimizing the Parliament rather than you delegitimizing the Parliament through your actions.
Well, that's true. This is not the only case when they've done so. I mean, we've seen what they did with the special courts during August 2015. On the first vote, the Parliament said no to the special courts, to the constitutional amendments that would open the door for its establishment. And then the government presented the same constitutional amendment a month later, and they used coercion against some of the members of Parliament in order to take their yes vote. And then it was approved. In a month's time, 7 members of Parliament changed their mind on a very particular and very important issue in Kosovo. So in this, I think that this is a clear indication of how the government is misusing the Parliament for its own decisions.
So what needs to be done for your movement, for the other members of the opposition, to come back to normal operations in Parliament?
Now we have moved into a different stage. Our protest initially started with, against the agreements with Serbia and against the agreement with Montenegro. And as you know, we have started the protest by a petition first. 205,000 citizens of Kosovo signed a petition against these agreements, and the government took no note of that. Then we have started with a smaller scale protest in order to withdraw the attention of the government that these agreements are not going to be accepted. And the government neglected that, ignored that as well. So we were pushed into moving into more drastic measures of protest in order for us to be listened. And now we came to a point where, because of the protests, the president of Kosovo has sent to the Constitutional Court the principles of the establishment of the community of Serb majority municipalities. And the Constitutional Court ruled in December last year that the whole agreement, the 25th August agreement, was in total violation of the Constitution of Kosovo. 23 articles of the Constitution of the Republic of Kosovo were violated by these principles. Basically, what the Constitutional Court said was that this agreement risked the total overturn of the constitutional order of Kosovo. So it's not just a violation of the Constitution. It risked the core sovereignty and the relationship between central and local institutions that are guaranteed by the Constitution of Kosovo. And as such, this government cannot continue to act as the government of Kosovo. So our demand now...
But the Constitutional Court didn't say that, you're saying that.
We're saying that. The Constitutional Court just said that the agreement was in total violation of the Constitution. Now, obviously, once a government has signed an agreement with a third party, with a foreign state, which risked the very core of the sovereignty of Kosovo, that government, at least what they can do is resign. But as we can see now, it is not that just they are not resigning, but also they are saying that they are going to continue the process of the establishment of Serb majority municipalities community, although it has been ascertained and ruled by the Constitutional Court that that would overturn the constitutional order of Kosovo.
So you wouldn't accept changes in the agreement according to the violations that the Constitutional Court has outlined?
We have to view this at the broader picture. And the broader picture is that Kosovo has been engaged into a dialogue with Serbia since 2011. And since 2012, this dialogue has moved on a higher scale, on the level of prime ministers. This dialogue has been presented to the world as a dialogue that will normalize relations between Kosovo and Serbia. But in reality, what it is that it is a dialogue that Serbia is using for two purposes. One, to get closer to the EU, and now they have the status of a candidate country.
They started accession talks.
And they started the accession negotiations. While in the relation between Kosovo and Serbia, they're using this dialogue in order to recreate institutionally and territorially Kosovo to fit their interest and their requests.
But the international community, when I say the EU and the United States have been closely involved in this entire process from the beginning. Presumably neither country, neither the EU nor the US would envisage a situation whereby Kosovo's sovereignty would be further undermined by Serbia. In other words, they ultimately want Serbia to recognize Kosovo, not to reabsorb in any way or control Kosovo. Wouldn't you agree with that?
I think that what is currently happening is that Serbia is moving further away from recognizing Kosovo. Or what Serbia is aiming to do is that maybe at the end they will recognize Kosovo as a sovereign country, but only when they have achieved to create an institutional entity within Kosovo which is going to resemble Republic Srpska in Bosnia. Because Serbia has recognized Bosnia in '95 as well after Dayton Agreement. But only when Izetbegovic in Bosnia recognized a Serbia within Bosnia. So this is more or less where Kosovo is heading through this dialogue. Obviously the pace is different. Dayton ended in 2 weeks. This is taking for years, but Bosnia, Dayton aimed at ending a bloody war in Bosnia. Now, because we live in peaceful times, then the pace is more slower.
So you're saying Serbia would recognize Kosovo as an independent state, but only on the model of a Bosnia?
Yeah. Only once Kosovo recognizes to have a republic within Kosovo.
A two-entity system, basically, is what you're saying.
Which is going to be controlled fully and politically by Serbia. But when it comes to the community, just I need to add this, when it comes to the community of Serb majority municipalities, which through the 25th August agreement and through the first agreement of 2013, more or less have or resemble a republic with the powers, executive, legislative powers that they have, the situation is even worse than Bosnia. Because at least in Bosnia, Republika Srpska has no formal links with Belgrade, with the government of Serbia. Really, in reality, we know that they are linked, but formally not. With the community of Serb majority municipalities, there are these clear formal links as well. On one side, by Serbia being the guarantee of the agreement and its implementation. So it's one of the signing parties, and the agreement cannot be interpreted one-sidedly by any of the parties. So it has to be agreed as an interpretation from both parties, which means that any sort of a community of Serb majority municipalities to be established in Kosovo, it has to be agreed with Serbia. This is the first problem. The second problem is that there is direct financial link between the community and Serbia, where Serbia is one of the parties that finances the budget of the community, which gives a lot of sway to Serbia, both political and economical, over the community of Serb majority municipalities, which means that indirectly it gives a lot of sway over Kosovo overall.
So what would be your suggestion? What is your position? In other words, should this agreement not be implemented in any way, shape or form, or should there be some let's say, allowance for a certain degree of cultural, linguistic autonomy of the Serbian minority in Kosovo? What is your position on this minority question?
You see, the minorities in Kosovo already have rights, even more than any of the European standards when it comes to the rights that minorities should enjoy. With the current constitution, minorities of Kosovo, and especially Serbs in this case, because I think that there is an inequality there as well. Among minorities, Serbs are privileged. They have a lot of rights, and they have the Serb majority municipalities whose rights as local governments are higher than any of the other municipalities in Kosovo. So basically, the municipality of Mitrovica North has more powers than the municipality of Pristina, which is the capital. according to the current constitution. And in this respect, I think that what we need as Kosovo, and this is a debate that we should do, of what kind of a society do we want to live in, we think at Vendosia that the best society to live in is a society that is based on equality among citizens and also on cooperation and integration, rather than this, the ethnic division on the ground which prevents integration and cooperation. The Ahtisaari plan, when it was presented to Kosovo, among other things, it was presented under the banner of human rights. And through human rights, what we got on the ground is segregation rather than integration. So it's in total opposition of what the main claim of the civic movement in the United States of America in the 60s said. So basically, then segregation was against basic human rights. Currently, segregation is being presented to us as a basic human right. And I don't think that this is the way to go forward.
But why would the internationals, particularly Berlin, Brussels, Washington, want to establish yet another state that they're frustrated with? In other words, Bosnia is a frustration for the European community. They cannot push reforms through because things are constantly blocked by different governments. The entity voting system, blockages by Republika Srpska of national legislation, inability to form a government in the federation. If a similar scenario were to develop in Kosovo, this would be another failing state. Why would the international community want this?
I think first we have to note that, you know, the international community, the countries that have recognized Kosovo, the countries that have helped Kosovo for a long time, like the United States of America, Great Britain, Germany, France, but especially the United States of America, cannot be put into a position where they would defend the interests of Kosovo more than our own government would. So in this respect, I think that this has to be noted. There is an order of things. If the government of Kosovo signs an agreement and says that this agreement is in line with our own interests, obviously it is going to be accepted by the countries that have recognized Kosovo as a sovereign country. But if the government of Kosovo refuses to sign such an agreement, as they should have done, then obviously we could get aid in this refusal from the countries that have helped us.
But do you think this agreement is a condition imposed by the European Union, by the United States, to move Kosovo into the European Union?
It might be.
Just as it's a condition for Serbia to sign for them to get the accession talks underway?
Yeah, so there might be sort of a informal talks and informal conditions being put to Kosovo that I'm not aware of. But what I'm saying is that at least according to the public discourse and at least according to the public statements given by the officials of the countries, all of the countries said that we would accept anything that Kosovo's government would accept. Even Secretary Kerry, when he was here last year, the end of last year, he said a sentence which to me is very revealing, and that was that we would never accept any agreement that would undermine the sovereignty of Kosovo. The way I understand it, this means that if you convince me that this undermines your sovereignty as a government, as a society, then I would not accept this agreement. But since you put your signature there, this tells me otherwise. And in this respect, obviously, that I'm supporting that agreement. So I think that, yes, responsibilities to run our country remain with us. We do not expect that the others are going to run our country and the others are going to do more for our country than we as a society and as a government. So in this respect, I think that what is happening with this dialogue, we have to understand what is being achieved through this dialogue, which is in total violation of the dialogue and the way that it was represented. So basically, we are not normalizing relations with Serbia, and we have to note also that that's impossible without Serbia's recognition. Once Serbia recognizes Kosovo, then yes, we can have a dialogue with Serbia, and that would truly be a dialogue between two equal parties which are aiming to normalize the relations.
So you're saying the recognition should come first, not the process to enable, let's say, confidence between the two governments to be able to recognize each other?
It's necessary. You know, Croatia has signed an agreement with the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia for normalization of relations in '96, so 1 year after the war ended in Croatia. And that agreement was possible only when they recognized each other as independent countries, and they recognized each other's borders.
Let me ask
Without that,
yeah.
there is no normalization.
Let me
The
ask
second
another
thing,
question.
which I think is very important, I'm sorry, is that this dialogue has also been presented to us as the only means whereby we can integrate Serbs that live in Kosovo. And I think that this is not true either. And the dialogue has shown that we are actually, through the dialogue and through its outcomes, we are segregating more, we are more divided in Kosovo rather than integrated. So in this respect, I think that there is a total different means that we should use. One is that with Serbia, we should have different policies. With Serbs in Kosovo, we should have an open dialogue.
I was just going to come to this, actually. It strikes me that the main subject here isn't that closely involved in these discussions. In other words, the Serbian minority in this country, in Kosovo. Are you suggesting some sort of more intensified dialogue with leaders of the Serbian population here?
I think that the proper dialogue would have been, and that should happen in Kosovo, is the dialogue between the central institutions of Kosovo and its citizens. In this case, the Serbian minority that lives in Kosovo, who are citizens of Kosovo. And this dialogue should be an open democratic dialogue, not a closed dialogue behind closed doors in Brussels, but an open dialogue in Kosovo. And it should aim not at reconciliation, as we had numerous conferences so far, but it should aim at development and integration through economic and social development. And I think that this would have been the only proper dialogue that would integrate all of the citizens of Kosovo within the political, economic and social system of Kosovo. This is not something that is going to be easy, but it is necessary in order to create the society that we want to create. So the society that we are aiming for does not discriminate, but does not privilege either. Privileges are discriminations. Privileges for few are discriminations for the rest. Currently we have a lot of privileges. We have the worst privilege that we have currently is the privilege that the corrupt politicians have, that have captured the state and they use it for their own ends.
So would you define your party as a civic party, a citizens' party, rather than an ethnic-based party?
Yes, I think, although that is not, cannot be empirically presented, but I think that yes, Vetendosi's program has this a huge civic dimension because we put the main emphasis of political decisions to the people. So basically, Vetvendosia means self-determination, which means that...
Do you have minority members in senior positions in the party?
No, not in senior positions. We have a few minority members, but they are very, very few. We don't have any Serbs yet that have become a member of Vetvendosia. We have Bosniaks, Ashkali, Roma,
Turks, yeah.
and I'm not sure about Turks. I have to check that. But what I'm trying to say is that, especially when it comes to Serbs living in Kosovo, because of Serbian parallel structures, it is currently impossible to be able to talk to them because you can't reach them. Anytime you want to discuss to Serbs living in Kosovo, you have this discussion mediated by Serbian illegal and criminal structures that remain in Kosovo, both in police, in judiciary, health, education, and all the other systems. So in this respect, I think that the biggest prevention of Serbs integrating in Kosovo is actually Serbia. Serbia does not want Serbs to integrate in Kosovo because Serbia wants to use Serbs living in Kosovo as a political instrument in their hands.
Even though it's a small instrument in terms of the numbers?
Yes, it is. It is a small instrument, but it has been very effective the way Serbia has used it so far. I don't think that it is just and right from the Republic of Kosovo to leave Serbs in the hands of Serbia. We should take responsibilities for Serbs that live in Kosovo. We should provide security for them. We should provide well-being for them, workplaces, education, health, and all the other services that the state should provide to its citizens.
Let us go back a little bit, or move forward a little bit from this. In terms of the domestic politics, from what I understand, you've given the government a deadline to resign by the end of February. Tell me if I'm correct. If that is the case, what happens if they don't follow your advice? In other words, what happens if they don't resign? Are you planning any sort of disruptive activities, protest actions? What would be your response?
On the protest that we held on the Independence Day on 17th of February, we gave 10 days to the government until the 27th of February in order for them to resign. And if they don't, then obviously we are going to organize a protest which are going to intensify in time scale. Because we see that this government, the way that it has been dealing with Kosovo and the way that they have undermined all the processes in Kosovo cannot be a government of Kosovo, and as a society and as a republic we need to use this opportunity in order to move on a different track of development. So far, for 16 years now, Kosovo has more or less used these mechanisms, both the international presidency of Kosovo under the auspices of UNMIK previously, and then the government of Kosovo after the Declaration of Independence in 2008. We use more or less the same mechanisms in order to solve the issues that we deal with. And these mechanisms have proved wrong. Currently, the situation that we have is worse, and it's becoming worse on a year-to-year basis. And as such, obviously, this is a call, an alarm call, that things have to be done differently in Kosovo. What we are proposing as Vetvendosia is that we should have these changes into all sectors of social and political life in Kosovo. And we need to change the relationship between the institutions and the responsibilities that they have towards the people. Rather than seeing that the people of Kosovo, as the current government sees them, only as vote givers and taxpayers, we need to see them as citizens that have rights and as sovereign citizens that actually, if I may say this, own the country.
So you will promote social protest demonstrations, presumably peaceful. You're not planning any violent actions in response to a non-resignation of the government? This is the fear that the international community in particular has, that Kosovo could be destabilized by violent actions, violent protests.
I think that this is the fear that our government is presenting. I think that, on the 17th of February, this was actually their public declaration, especially of the foreign minister, Hashim Thaci, who is one of the coalition partners, where he said that we expected you opposition guys to come in the government, and we would have given you what you deserve. So this was a direct threat from the government to the people. And I think that this is not a democratic way to deal with things. So basically I think that the very democratic process in Kosovo is undermined from two aspects which are very important. One is the captured state. And in the capture state, obviously, the parties that are in government, they use state apparatus for their own gains. And the second thing is high levels of corruption, which have made these politicians very rich, and then they use the poverty of the people in order to gain politically from that. So these have to be disrupted, this never-ending cycle.
But in answer to my question, you are discounting the use of violence, I presume?
No, but what I'm saying is that we need to show determination. We are going to show determination in our protests. That this government cannot pass. This government has to be accountable.
Self-determination in your protest.
Determination. So in this respect, I think that it needs to be noted that the government of Kosovo, the current government of Kosovo, and the way that they are going to deal with the situation is going to mark the close future of the political but also the social life in Kosovo. And there were two great protests that happened this year, on the 9th of January and 17th of February. Both of these protests had around 100,000 people in them. And what is different in these protests from the protests that we have seen in the past is that now we have moved into a different stage as well. It's not just the three opposition parties that are protesting against the government. It's the civil society as well. It's the intellectuals of Kosovo as well. It's the trade unions of Kosovo as well. So basically there is this social movement in Kosovo that goes well beyond the three opposition parties, which are requesting and demanding that this government resigns.
So you see your supporters expanding during this?
Not necessarily. They're not necessarily supporters for Vetvendosia or AAK or NISMA. They're supporters for the cause, and this is very important. So basically, what we have, the lowest common denominator from these people that come from different walks of life, is that Kosovo cannot be governed by these people anymore. And I think that this is a very important message to be sent to the government and to the rest of the world, that the society of Kosovo, the people of Kosovo, are actually moving politically. They're becoming more determined politically, that they are not going to accept themselves to live in such conditions in Kosovo anymore.
But presumably, ultimately, that public frustration needs to be channeled into creation of or development of political parties that could challenge the government, challenge the governing parties in legitimate democratic elections, and not simply through street protests, public pressures. I mean, that could bring down a government, but it doesn't create anything. So presumably the focus should be on building our parties that have public legitimacy, that have a good program, that are corruption-free, that have a good international agenda. I mean, what is your view on that?
First, what we're trying and what we're doing through the protest is what you have said. We're trying to bring down the government. This would open the door then for free and fair elections in Kosovo. And obviously the next government is going to be established by and through elections. But what is important currently is that this government should resign because of popular discontent with their policies. And this is a clear sign that such policies cannot be applied by any future government of Kosovo. This is important as well. So the protests now do not have their value, does not derive only from their success at the present, but from the signs that they are going to present for the future as well. What we need currently is a total change of the way that particular people in politics view politics, and especially of the way that public officials understand their role and their responsibilities towards the people. And this is, I think, that the most necessary change of political paradigm that should happen in Kosovo.
There is one election pending here in Kosovo, and that's the presidential election, the indirect election in parliament. What is your view on this? Will you try and block the presidential vote?
Yes, because we don't think that in the current state Kosovo is able, Kosovo's institutions are able and have the legitimacy to elect a president.
But it's constitutional to elect within a certain period.
But it was procedurally constitutional as well when they voted the agreement of 2013. But now the Constitutional Court says that its substance was in violation of the Constitution. And I think that the same thing is here. Procedurally, you might elect a president, but in substance, it would have been against the political interests of Kosovo, because you would have a president that has been elected under this situation where the political antagonisms have moved to a different stage. And as such, I don't think that the institutions of Kosovo currently can do such a thing. On the other hand, we have a government that has no democratic legitimacy anymore because of the severe violations that they've done towards the Constitution of Kosovo. And one of the persons who was directly involved into this violation, Hashim Thaçi, who used to be a prime minister and now a foreign minister, he wants to get elected as the president. So basically, if the assembly now votes and elects him as a president, they're electing one of the violators of the Constitution as president. So this cannot be constitutional, although the procedures might be in place.
Will you boycott the parliament, or will you try and disrupt the parliament? What are your plans?
We are going to protest in the parliament, as we have done so far. So
inside the parliament?
Even in this case as well, yeah.
So you don't want these presidential elections at this point at all?
No, as I said, these institutions cannot elect a president.
But in a bigger picture, would you support direct presidential elections, in other words, by popular vote rather than by parliament? Do you think this should be the arrangement in Kosovo?
We, as a political movement, we were against this idea because we want Kosovo to remain a parliamentary democracy, a parliamentary republic. And we think that if you elect the president by a popular vote, then obviously its executive powers have to be moved into a different stage. They have to be promoted. And as such, Kosovo would become this mixed system where you would have a president and then you would have a parliament and a government. And I don't think that that's what Kosovo needs. So Kosovo should remain a parliamentary democracy. And obviously we should aim at building our institutions and making them more efficient. And I don't think that this is possible without these political crises. So I think that the crisis The current crisis that we have should be seen as a potential rather than as a risk. Obviously, the government sees it as a risk because it is a crisis that is pushing them to resign, and they don't want to resign. But for the society, this crisis is a risk. Is a potential, sorry.
Looking at the sort of bigger picture, you've occasionally described Kosovo, you've often described Kosovo as not being fully independent, not being fully sovereign, not being fully self-determined. In fact, in one interview that I saw, you described Kosovo as a colony of the United States, of the European Union. Tell me if I'm wrong, if that's what you meant. Do you still see Kosovo as some sort of a colonial outpost of the United States or of the European Union?
No, on the interview that you're referring to, that was conducted when UNMIK was here, and we saw UNMIK as having these prerogatives of being a colonial administration, because UNMIK had this full political sway over Kosovo. I mean, they were not democratically elected, they were appointed from abroad, they had all the powers, both legislative, judiciary and executive were vested into one man, the special representative, and this was clearly, it had these elements that the colonial administrations used to have.
But that's gone now, you say?
That's gone now. No, in the independence Kosovo, Kosovo is not and cannot be viewed, and it has no mission in Kosovo that would resemble a colonial administration. What we used to have in post-independence Kosovo was the international civilian representative, who was Mr. Peter Faith, who had some of the powers that UNMIK had, although because of the political situation he felt no need to use them. And then we had this ULEX, the rule of law mission, the EU rule of law mission, who inherited some of the powers that UNMIK had on the police, judiciary, customs services and such. And ULEX is still here, and they still have the executive powers. We are against these executive powers of the international missions and currently of ULEX, because we think that this is undermining both sovereignty and democracy in Kosovo by having these foreignly appointed missions in Kosovo, and they are creating this situation currently in the justice system where the duality of it is giving a lot of space for local judges and prosecutors to be irresponsible towards their duties. We don't think that justice can be imported. We don't think that democracy can be imported. We think that both of these, which are very important for the proper running of a democratic country, have to be authentic. So they have to be built from within. We have to understand what democracy is. We have to understand why we need the rule of law.
But do you support entry into the European Union for Kosovo?
Yes, we support entry in the European Union.
In which case you would support all the conditionality that goes along with that. In other words, not imposing reforms on you, but giving you conditions that you have to meet in order to qualify for European Union membership.
Obviously, but currently the problem that Kosovo has is that it is not considered as a fully sovereign state by the European institutions because of the 5 non-recognizers. And as such, the relationship that Kosovo has with the European Union is different from all of the other countries. And that can be seen in the Stabilization and Association Agreement that has been signed last year as well, where in its text, but also in the procedures that have been used, is different from all the other Stabilization and Association Agreements of the countries in the region.
So what should be done to make those 5 EU members recognize?
But I think that one of the reasons that has postponed the recognition, one of the reasons, not the major one, is this new dialogue with Serbia, because this is presenting the wrong signals to the world, to the countries that have not recognized Kosovo, that the status of Kosovo is still not definite. And because it's not defined, let's not move ahead with this. Let's wait and see. So I think that this is presenting a very bad signal to the rest of the world. I think that the countries in the European Union, the 5 non-recognizers, have to acknowledge the fact that the independence of Kosovo, the sovereignty of Kosovo, is a fact, and that will never go away. But in order for this to be possible, I think that the recognition from Serbia is the most important thing. In this respect, I think that the European Union could have done more in order to put more political sway over Serbia for it to recognize the independence of Kosovo. But because this is not happening, and this is not happening also because the government of Kosovo is always ready and waiting to enter into a dialogue with Serbia, which is unconditioned whatsoever, then this is preventing these domino effect things that would have happened if Serbia recognized Kosovo. For example, Serbia needed this dialogue with Kosovo. They needed the dialogue with Kosovo because this was the only way where they would present to the Brussels their readiness to have good relations with all of the countries and regions in the Balkans.
In the Balkans. Looking at the Balkans, looking at the region, you are often perceived in the region, but also in the United States, as being pan-Albanianist or ultra-nationalist. What is your view on the future of relations between the different Albanian communities, between Albania and Kosovo? Do you promote reunification or unification? How do you see Macedonia? How do you see the future of Montenegro? What is your position on this?
Well, we are for national unification. That is one of the parts of our political program, and we think that the Republic of Kosovo, to become a fully sovereign country, it should have all the rights that other sovereign countries enjoy. Currently, our sovereignty is undermined on the very fact that by our own constitution and through the Ahtisaari plan, we are prevented from being able to unify with any of the countries in the region or parts of the countries in the region. And this clause, this article, has been put into our constitution to prevent Kosovo from unifying with Albania.
So you think that should be removed?
That should be removed. The people of Kosovo should join the right to decide upon their future. And one of the things where they could decide is whether they want to unify with Albania or whether they want to continue as a sovereign republic.
Would you have a referendum on this question?
Yes.
Or how would
we
you...
think that two referendums should happen on this question, one in Kosovo and the other one obviously in Albania, because we need to know whether the people in Albania also want this unification to happen. And I think that one of the reasons why the referendum is prevented in this is because the answer is already clear. I think that this is one of the referendums where the answer would have been known before the question has been put. And I think that this is unjust, and this is undermining the sovereignty and popular sovereignty of the Republic of Kosovo.
Well, let me ask you hypothetically, if there was to be unification, where would be the capital?
That is a sort of a decision that we would have reached together. I don't think that that is the main topic. To me, the capital would have been anywhere. But I think that Tirana is the current capital of Albania.
Well, the reason I ask is because surely if you're saying Kosovo should be independent, should be equal with Albania, once there is unification, one of the or both of the political elites has to surrender something. In other words, they won't be independent anymore.
Yes, but I don't think that this should be a decision of political elites. This is what I'm saying. This should be a decision of the people. And then the people would decide whether they want to unify. And this would have been the major decision. The other things can be arranged. But the major decision is whether there is a popular consent for unification.
What about Macedonia, the large Albanian population of Macedonia? Where do they fit in the picture?
I think that Albanians that live in Macedonia, who comprise at least 25% of the overall population of Macedonia, are fully discriminated and suppressed by the government in Skopje. And I think that this is one of the things that is causing this current and never-ending destabilization of Macedonia. The way that the government in Macedonia, who is the current government I'm talking, is very much linked to the government in Serbia. The way that they deal with Albanians is in total violation of the basic principle that a democratic government should have. And
even though there's an Albanian party in the government?
Yeah, but I mean, there is an Albanian party within the government, but if you see the statistics, the employment statistics in the public sector, the judges, prosecutors, police officers, army officers, health, education, investments, public investments, the parts where Albanians live there's a huge difference between that and the parts where the others live in Macedonia. So I think that in this respect, this discrimination of Albanians is actually telling Albanians that Macedonia will never be a country of their own as well.
So what's the solution?
Well, they will not be treated by... I think that the government, it is up to the government and the people of Macedonia to decide upon this, and whether they want to have a Macedonia where all can live in peace and equally. But I think that inequality is the biggest risk to peace. Once you have a system that is designed to suppress a part of a population, then that would eventually bring conflict to your door.
So are you suggesting a referendum for the Albanian population in Macedonia also?
I think that the Albanians in Macedonia should first strive politically, through demonstration, protest, through political organization, in order to make their position within Macedonia stronger and more equal. I think that this is the pressing issue now in Macedonia. And I don't think that this division among political parties there of Albanians is actually moving to this direction, especially with the way that two big political parties have treated the interests of Albanians. They have failed the Albanians in Macedonia, and they are now very disappointed with their political representatives as well. So something new should happen to political sphere in Macedonia, and especially among the political parties that represent Albanians there, and there should be a unification of Albanians politically in Macedonia in order for them to gain their rights and to guarantee their rights. I don't think that the Ohrid agreement has done any good to Albanians there, and I think that the Albanians in Macedonia should enjoy much more rights than they currently do.
Let me ask you, in terms of some of your both domestic and international policies, some would view it as playing into the hands of not only Serbian nationalists but Russian imperial interests. In other words, one, you're trying to destabilize the situation here. This is the way it's perceived. I'm not saying you are, but your actions will destabilize political situation in Kosovo, and your sort of pan-Albanian unification program also could destabilize the region. How do you respond to that? Are you playing into Serbian nationalist hands?
We are the total opposite of the Serbian nationalists. I think that the concessions that have been done to Serbia to their hegemonistic claims against Kosovo in this case are actually what is fusing more nationalism in Serbia. Because you have to see that Serbia as a nationalistic project, chauvinistic in this case, and as a political government is never satisfied with the concessions that they gain. So the more concessions you get, the more appetite they have. So in this respect, I think that any sort of a sign that has been sent by Kosovo to nationalists in Serbia that Kosovo can be brought back under Serbia's political sway, then they are going to be more obstinate in that, and they are going to do more in order to get this or make this happen. What we are proposing is a democratic process where we would have Albanians in the region become an equal party to the other countries in the region. We are not proposing that Albanians should start wars in order to occupy land that is inhabited by the rest. And what we are currently proposing is that two sovereign countries, Albania and Kosovo in this case, should join the right for their unification if the people choose to, in the current borders that we have.
We're running out of time at the moment, and I wanted to get in this very, very last question, if you could be brief in your answer. You've been critical of some of the ambassadors, US ambassadors here, about the US role in Kosovo. Would you say the US should have less of a role in Kosovo? In other words, for Kosovo to become truly self-determined and independent, there should be less of an EU interference and there should be less American interference. How do you see the relationship between Kosovo and the United States?
Obviously that we and any other Albanian in the region are very thankful to what the United States of America has done for us historically. And I'm not just saying since 1999, but even before that, since 1919. So in this respect, the Albanians are the only people in the region that are very thankful and see United States of America as a best friend internationally. And this is something that should be maintained. We see the relationship between the Republic of Kosovo in this case and the United States of America, the other countries that have recognized and helped Kosovo, as a relationship of partnership. And this partnership has to be obviously designed on mutual interests that we have. And we have a lot of, I think, mutual interest in the region, but also sometimes internationally as well. Obviously, Kosovo is a very small country. And the United States is one of the superpowers. So we're not claiming that we should have an equal partnership and relationship. But when it comes to the things that happen in Kosovo and in the region, I think that we should, as Kosovo, design this, together with the United States of America, design this new partnership and new alliance that we have. But those who have never said that Albanians should change partners, as we have been accused. We have the alliances with the Western world, and we should remain with that. But what we need is a different quality of these alliances and different quality of these partnerships. We think that, especially after the declaration of independence in Kosovo, the government of Kosovo, who has been run more or less all this time by Hashim Thaçi, have been trying to privatize these relations. So the friendship that we have with the United States should not be privatized. It is a friendship between the two people, and the alliance should be an alliance between two countries.
Visar, Ymeri, thank you very much. I'm sure we're going to continue this conversation in the future. We've raised a number of topics that haven't been exhausted. I think they need a lot of discussion over the coming months, coming years. Thank you very much for joining me on the show, and look forward to having you on again at some point. Thank you.
Thank you.
Unfortunately, we have already come to the end of today's show. I have greatly enjoyed being with you and with my colleagues here at RTK. Good night, everyone. Stay healthy, be productive, and remain optimistic. See you all very soon. Miru Pavshim.